Hey, Mike. Hey, Scott. What's going on, Mike? You were saying something. What was it?
Paul, you and I were talking about Academy Award nominations last week. So, of course, I've got the TV on the morning as the nominations are being announced, Channel 5. Who pops up but Scott right there in front of me?
All right. That's right. Our special guest is Scott Movie Mantz. Scott, you almost don't require any introduction because you're so amazing. You have such an incredible career. We actually went for lunch at Lovey's in Calabasas. Mike Polydoros, my co-host of Ticket to Ride for ComScore, and I went to lunch with Scott Movie Mantz, and we're standing there waiting for our table, and somebody walks in out of the blue. I know Scott didn't hire this person. She comes in, she goes, "You're on TV."
Hold on. Do you really know that Scott didn't hire that person?
I'm pretty damn sure of it. I swear. Scott would never do that.
Scout's honor. I did not do that. I swear to God, I did not do that. So I was at Sundance and I was supposed to come back on Tuesday. Well, as you know, the Oscar nominations for the first time in 7 years were being done in person at the Academy headquarters, the Samuel Goldwyn Theater, where we have seen so many screenings all year round, especially during award season. Now, the last time I was in the room for the nominations might have been when La La Land was nominated. And, that was right towards the end of my time with Access Hollywood. And then, the next year, they decided to do the nominations online. They did away with the in-person thing, and they also did away with the excitement of Oscar nomination morning by taking away the in-person elements. So it certainly made sense when the pandemic hit and we were in lockdown. But when it was announced that the nominations were going to be in person, I went, oh my God, I have to be there. I have to be in that room again. To be there, like when you hear the excitement of a surprise nominee or the excitement, the gasping of an omission, a snub. I mean, you're talking 20 minutes and then it's all over. But to be there with all the other reps and the studio people and the journalists, and it's so exciting.
And Scott, I think a corollary to what's going to happen at this year's awards, I think we're back. Over the last couple of years, it's been like the truncated Oscars, both in terms of the announcement, not in person, having a much lower profile due to the pandemic. And now it really feels like, and we'll get to the nominees, and I'm sure Polydoros here, Mike Polydoros will agree with us, that this is a different sort of Oscars than obviously during the pandemic era.
Oh, yeah.
And I think you just presented it in such a profound way, Scott, that just being there, and this is the first time in 3 years I've gotten up at 5 a.m. to listen to the announcement. And I used to go to the announcements way, way back in the 90s and the 2000s. So I'm really happy to hear that. But Mike, what's your perspective?
Well, my perspective is, as I'm sitting there and I'm watching the morning news on KTLA, and they do the live hit with Scott, and you can see Scott's excitement, but you can also feel, to your point, there is a swell. This is a big deal. Put something out online, big deal. It's the PR newswire. Everybody saw it. Yes, it's the Oscars, but it doesn't have that same kind of feel as you're reading out the names. You then have that excitement coming from the room, and the countdown has now begun to who's actually going to win the awards, how's it going to go, what's it going to be. And getting into it a little more, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but the nominees themselves kind of expanded the pool a little bit. Paul, you and I talked about it last week, where even though they had expanded to 10 nominees over the last few years, they didn't really take advantage, in my mind, of expanding it to more of the popcorn movies.
They did now.
They did a great job this year. But that's important because it's all inclusive of these movies. I mean, Scott mentions La La Land. And Scott, how many Q&As did you do for us on that one?
Like 8 or 9. Yeah, a lot.
But that was a movie that kind of transcended from critic darling to become a popcorn movie at the same time.
Right.
Where it's important for the audience to feel invested in the movie and to feel like there's a rooting interest. I saw it. I loved it. I found it. I just think it's important. It's a step in the right direction in the way it all went today.
Mike, I agree with you 100%, but I'm just happy that Top Gun Maverick was nominated, because if it hadn't been, I would have had to drive to Scott's house and kind of calm him down.
Oh my God.
There would have been trouble. I don't know what kind of trouble. There would have been trouble. Right, Scott?
Well, first of all, you talk about how this is a big turnaround. And yes, being in the room was a very big deal. I remember my alarm went off at 2:45 in the morning, and I just got back from Sundance the night before. So, I mean, my body clock was completely out of whack, but I don't think I've ever been this excited to get up at 2:45 in the morning, because I walk in, I go through security at the entrance, and I immediately start to see a lot of publicists I know and a lot of people I know. And just, I was so excited to see everybody. But, you know, when you're sitting there and the nominations are being announced by Riz Ahmed and Allison Williams, and you hear the nominees for Best Adapted Screenplay, and when the nomination for Adapted Screenplay for Top Gun Maverick was announced, I went, yeah! That being in the room and that excitement. I was sitting right next to Scott Feinberg. He's a good friend of mine. He works at the Hollywood Reporter. He's the Feinberg Forecast. He laughed at me. And then when, Andrea Riseborough was nominated for Best Actress, we'll get to that. That was a big, oh my gosh. And when Daniel Deadwyler for Till was not nominated, that was a big deal, because that was a big snub. As an example, I remember the year that Argo was going through the motions, but for 2012, I was in the room, and when Ben Affleck's name was not announced for Best Director, people were really, really surprised. Everybody was gasping, oh my God, they admitted Ben Affleck. And then 12 hours later at the Critics' Choice Awards, he won Best Director. That was wild. And I said this on KTLA, I did 2 hits, one with Sam Rubin, the other by myself. And on my second hit, I said, look at this transition. From last year, you had the Best Picture went to a streaming service for the first time ever. This year, you have 3 movies that are blockbusters, or 4, actually, if you include Everything Everywhere All at Once. 2 of them made more than $1.5 billion worldwide. The Academy is saying movies are back in a very, very big way. A movie is a movie when it's playing on the big screen. And like you pointed out at the top of the conversation, Mike, finally, the 10 nominees for Best Picture, they're finally taking advantage of it to nominate popcorn movies. They could have done that with The Dark Knight. They didn't do it. They did it this year with Avatar: The Way of Water, Top Gun Maverick, and then to a lesser extent, Elvis and Everything All at Once. I've said that title 1,000 times.
I have too. I've got it emblazoned in my brain. But here's the point too that Scott and Mike, you're making brilliantly, is that back in 2009, for the films of 2009, when they were nominated in 2010, that was probably the first and only until now manifestation of what opening up to 10 nominees represented, because you had a really strong class of contenders for Best Picture that were not only critically acclaimed, but also blockbusters in the mix. This year, at the time of nominations, back on Tuesday of this week, the collective domestic cum for the 10 nominees was almost 1.6 billion. Now, where these films wind up when the telecast happens remains to be seen, but this was the highest grossing crop at the time of nominations ever.
Wow.
And I think that's a great thing. However, I'm going to play devil's advocate via someone who reached out to me on LinkedIn, who said, and I want to get both of your reactions, Mike and Scott, to this. I posted, this is great to have this mix of blockbusters and independent films, because this is what the 10 nominations was all about. Here's what this person writes. Yep. Don't worry about quality so long as it's made lots of money. It's a legitimate move, but perhaps adding a category of viewer's choice would have been a better decision, so long as neither Top Gun nor Avatar win. If it expands the audience base, so be it. What do you say to that? It's a legitimate.
It's completely wrong, because I was having this conversation with somebody today, and it is, movies are one of those few things in this world that are 1000% subjective, meaning what is great for you may not float my boat. Doesn't make it any less of a good movie or whatever it is. To create a movie like Avatar, or to create a movie like Top Gun, it's great in its own way if you compare it to Everything Everywhere All at Once. There are different kinds of movies, but they're still, the execution is flawless in these movies. So how can you sit there and say, well, that one's great, but that one's not, because that one didn't tackle a serious subject? Or,
by the way, are all independent movie is naturally better than blockbusters. It's not like every blockbuster is bad and every indie movie is good, although we hope for that. But Scott, what's your reaction to that kind of comment?
Well, first of all, they had the sort of people's pick the other year, and everyone thought it was going to go to Spider-Man No Way Home. And it went to something else that I remember people were reacting like, really, that's what the people's choice was? It was like, it absolutely should have gone to No Way Home. So that just goes to show you that that choice is BS. No, the nominees for Best Picture should be in the nominees for Best Picture, and that's it. And this year you have that. Listen, my top 2 movies of the year, personally, in terms of movies that I've loved the most, are Top Gun and Everything Everywhere. And both of those movies got nominated. And I just think that, again, the fact that you have a set of films that is the polar opposite of what the previous 2 years were, this is a signal. The Academy is saying big movies are back. And it's almost like the Academy is saying, I've missed you so much, big Hollywood movies. Gosh, I just want to give you a big cinematic hug because I've missed you so much. And the fact that, look, of course, Avatar got nominated because it's a visual effects. I mean, on a visual effects scale, it's a great movie. But it's Top Gun Maverick that really caught people off guard in the best possible way. Paul, you were at CinemaCon. I'm guessing, Mike, you were there too.
Yep, I was there.
I had COVID, so I missed it. But I did see Top Gun Maverick the day after you all did because I had already gotten over it. And I saw it here in LA in Century City. And I thought it was the best movie I'd seen of the year. And by the end of the year, it was still my number 1 film. It's a great film. People were surprised by how good a sequel to a 36-year-old movie could possibly be. They were reminded of like, holy moly, Tom Cruise really does make great movies. He hadn't been on the big screen since 2018 with Mission Impossible Fallout. And then there's the fact that Maverick was delayed 4 times over 2 years because, you know, these different variants and COVID kept pushing it back until it hit the sweet spot of Memorial Weekend. It opens, everyone loves it. And I got to say, the scene with Val Kilmer alone gave it so much more emotional heft.
People were crying.
Yeah, people were crying.
A lot of gravitas there. And I think too, and Mike, we were there at that screening at CinemaCon. It was like, and Scott, you'll appreciate this. I think for a lot of people, it's like hearing Sgt. Pepper for the first time was watching Top Gun Maverick play out on that screen because it represented so much more to the industry, which at that point was really worried, despite the fact that Spider-Man No Way Home opened at these huge numbers.
But what I do want to say, though, is I don't believe that this was a token nomination to a big budget movie.
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
In my estimation, Top Gun Maverick earned every piece of that Best Picture nomination.
Agreed.
They dismiss it because it's a big action movie. And to those naysayers, you go make a big action movie that works that well, that all the pieces fit, that people are on the edge of their seat. Go ahead, pull it off. And then you can talk about how it didn't deserve it.
Yeah, sure.
And by the way, it's finite for a reason. In other words, not every film that everyone thinks should win can be nominated. It is by its nature an exclusive group of films. And if you don't agree with it, then you don't agree with it. But like Mike said, then go out and make your own movie and see what you can.
Well, the thing with Top Gun is this. You know, everything has been said about how the Academy, the membership of the Academy over the last 4 or 5 years has practically doubled. There is a lot more diversity in the Academy now. There's a lot more gender balance. And there is a lot more younger members of the Academy. I feel like every publicist I know is in the Academy now. But there is still a very, very big contingent, way more than 50% of the Academy, that is still on the older side. So you have older moviegoers who are not going back to the movies for all this time. The people who went to see Spider-Man and Shang-Chi and the Batman were the younger moviegoers who don't care about COVID and probably don't care about the Oscars. But the older members went back to the movies for the first time in 2 years, and the movie that they saw was Top Gun Maverick, and they went, holy moly, this movie is amazing. And when it came time to put the nominations on their ballots, they went, well, Top Gun was the first movie I saw in theaters, and it was an excellent movie. And don't you think that when it comes to the winners, those same Academy voters are going to say, this is more than just a great movie. This is a movie that has saved the theatrical exhibition side of our business. The reason we are here, the reason why we have our jobs. And this is a great movie by any measure. And for all those reasons and then some, that's the movie that I think deserves to win. And I think it will, because as many people like Everything Everywhere, which led the way with 11 nominations, there are a lot of people who don't like that movie and don't get it.
The other thing, too, about this group is that a movie like The Fabelmans, which Mike and I talked about on our Ticket to Ride podcast, was that the movie, it's made $15 million domestically. But I love that the Academy said it's not the box office awards, right? This is a great film that should be honored. And Tar and Triangle of Sadness and Women Talking, Banshees of Inisherin. This to me is like the perfect mix, no matter what you say. Your favorite, not your favorite, the royal favorite may not be included for many people. But this to me is like the perfect list of 10. And even Netflix has one film in there. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. All Quiet on the Western Front. Well, let me ask you a question about The Fabelmans. All right. Let's say Steven Spielberg did not direct The Fabelmans and it was someone else. Would it be nominated for Best Picture and Best Director?
That's a really good question.
Mike?
Look at us hesitating.
I'm going to take the fifth on that one. No, I mean, you're probably right, Scott. I mean, it is.
Look, I love Spielberg. He is the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. He's the reason a whole lot of younger movie makers are doing what they are doing. And here's a film that is pretty autobiographical in terms of like how the most successful filmmaker to ever walk the face of the earth since the Jurassic period, how he became the greatest and most successful filmmaker of all time. So you know what? Here you go, Mr. Spielberg. Here's the Academy Award for Best Director. But Fabelmans will not win Best Picture.
I agree. Yep.
And I love the movie, but again, if Paul Dergarabedian, if you directed The Fabelmans and it came out the exact same way it did, would it be nominated for Best Picture and Best Director? I don't know.
But Scott, you're right. But if I directed it, people wouldn't say it was a big box office disappointment because it is Spielberg. People are like, why isn't this movie earning $100 million? Well, it's not Jurassic Park. It's not trying to be a blockbuster. It's a personal story from a great filmmaker. So it was kind of like you almost couldn't win in this scenario because it's Spielberg, so it's expected to make a certain amount of money, which I'm not sure. I mean, he's not trying to be a blockbuster director here, but that's a subject for a whole other show.
But he's Spielberg.
Yeah.
He's Spielberg. And again, I love him. And I think that West Side Story, I love that film. Unfortunately, that came out at the worst possible time because it was December of 2021, right as Omicron variant was literally exploding. Everyone got COVID at that point. Like a month before Sundance, they turned it virtual.
But Scott, I'm going to ask you a question. I've had this debate with others as well. Even in a non-COVID period, what is West Side Story open to? I think it opened to, 11?
Yeah.
How much more would it actually have done in a non-COVID period?
I would say it would have done in the 20s.
I would say probably maybe 15, 16.
I mean, it's almost like an IP at this point because it's based on such a beloved film and Broadway show. And
look, I think it was a mashup of bad things happening for it at the same time. I think it would have been challenged at any period. And then I think adding on top of it, the Omicron variant taking off, everything was stacked up against the movie. And the movie's great. And some people say it's even better than the original.
Yeah.
And to that point, though, it makes it very difficult. When you have that beloved IP, you're remaking it. A lot of people are going, why are we remaking this movie in the first place? And then you put it on top of this variant going out. That was a tough situation, in 21 for that.
I have to jump in here and just remind everyone that you're listening to. We've invited Scott Mantz for a ticket to ride. Mike Polydoros, my co-host, president of Paper Airplane Media, and I'm Paul Dergarabedian, senior media analyst for ComScore. And we're so excited and thrilled to have Scott Movie Mantz on the program. I'm going to throw a question to both of you, and I want you to answer this as best you can. So there are movies that get nominated for Best Picture, yet their directors do not get nominated. For case in point, Elvis, okay? So here's my question. You can answer one at a time or together, whatever you want to do. Can a movie direct itself, and should a movie that's nominated for Best Picture automatically give its director a nomination? Whoever wants to take that first, go for it.
Can I go first on this?
Yes, you may.
All right. So first of all, it's impossible for every movie nominated for Best Picture to automatically get nominated for Best Director because they only have 5 directing nominees compared to 10 Best Picture nominees. So unless you're going to widen that field to 10, then you're already screwed on at least 5 Best Pictures, maybe even more, like in this year and almost every other year. But, you know, in the case of Elvis, I mean, that is definitely Baz Luhrmann's best movie in decades. I liked it even more than Moulin Rouge and Great Gatsby. I don't know why he wasn't nominated. I do think that, or I thought at the time when the Directors Guild Award nominations were announced and Joseph Kosinski made the cut for Top Gun, I went, oh my God, finally. Because up to that point, people were saying how great Top Gun was. It should be nominated for Best Picture, but no one was saying anything about Joseph Kosinski getting a Best Director nomination. And when he got the nomination by the DGA, I thought, oh, maybe he has a chance. But in the end, they went to Triangle of Sadness, which I think that movie is excellent. I love that film. But no, you're right, Paul. A movie doesn't direct itself. It makes no sense that a movie gets nominated for picture and not director. I mean, it happened last year with Sean Heder for Coda. Coda, you know, won 3 big awards.
That's actually a perfect example. So something like Elvis, which is so stylistic with Baz Luhrmann, that is made in his image, so to speak. That to me is, you can't have a Best Picture and not nominate somebody for Best Director. However, let's talk about Coda, which I really like Coda. Patrick Waxberger is a good friend and I love Patrick. But from a directing standpoint, I can see where that one, you know, the IP is good, the script is good, the performances are good. And granted, the director does a lot to get the performances out. But stylistically, it's a movie. Stylistically, there's nothing about Coda where I think we would all say, wow, the way that was shot or the way that was executed was groundbreaking. Where when you look at something like Elvis, you're going to go like, there were some things in that movie that looked awesome. And the way he positioned the camera or the way, like, that would be I can understand it with something like Coda. I can't understand it with something like Elvis. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm glad I asked this question because you both gave amazing answers.
I want to switch gears here a little bit. Instead of talking what has happened. So, Scott, you just came back from Sundance.
Yep.
And it's Sundance, as we know, it's a big deal. And it was probably, finally, we're in person and we're screening again. Put the movie man's hat on. What'd we like? What'd we see?
Oh, well, first of all, I got to tell you, I've been going to Sundance every year, except these last 2, every year in person since 2003. I've never missed a year other than the 2 COVID cancellations to virtual. I love Sundance. It's my favorite festival of the year. It's the one festival. I mean, I love Telluride, but when you go to Telluride, you know what you're going to get. Like, I knew Mike on September 2nd, 2016 at 2:30 p.m. at the Chuck Jones Theater. I knew when I went into that theater, I knew that La La Land was going to be a great movie and it was even better than I could have possibly imagined, and the rest is history. But with Telluride, it's a launching point for award season, whereas Sundance, every movie is a discovery. You never know what you're going to get. There's no anticipation. You have no idea what's going to be the big film that people are going to love and people are going to bid $20 million on and have it be worth it. Like Fair Play. Fair Play, acquired by Netflix for $20 million. I saw that film on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. It is excellent. So Phoebe Diviner, she's on Bridgerton. Alden Ehrenreich, who unfortunately was Han Solo. They're a young couple. They're engaged. They both work for the same financial firm, but they keep it quiet because they don't want to, get in trouble. And it looks like he's going to get promoted, but she gets promoted instead over him, and he can't handle it. He's threatened by it. He's jealous, and the impact it has on their relationship. The movie is excellent. It is a mainstream film that premiered at Sundance. It feels very, very polished. The direction is extremely assured, and it's a great film. That was the one that I loved the most. I mean, I saw about maybe 18 movies, and then I cut my trip short because I came back for the Oscar noms. So the movie that really got the most, I would say, buzz, controversy, people were really talking about was Jonathan Majors playing an aspiring bodybuilder in Magazine Dreams. Try to imagine Taxi Driver by way of Pumping Iron.
Wow.
And that's what this movie is. Jonathan Majors is a muscle-bound Travis Bickle who makes Travis Bickle look like Bugs Bunny. I mean, he is just really obsessed with making it as a bodybuilder. He's got serious mental problems. It's a very disturbing film. It's a very hard movie to watch. It's a brutal movie to sit through for almost 2 hours. But no question about it, Jonathan Majors' performance, physically and emotionally, the commitment is unbelievable. I mean, it's going to divide people because it is such a hard movie to watch. But one thing people will agree on and do agree on is that Jonathan Majors gave a spectacular performance. The other film that I really, really liked a lot was called Flora and Son, and it's directed by John Carney. Remember that movie Once?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Once and Begin Again was also his, and Sing Street. And like those films, Flora and Son is about the way that music connects us, the way that music heals people and mends bridges and family members and loved ones. And it is an absolute crowd pleaser in every sense of the word. No surprise, Apple TV Plus picked it up for $20 million. The other film that got picked up by Searchlight was called Theater Camp. It's a sort of mockumentary style, like Waiting for Guffman kind of movie about the people who work at this theater camp. They're trying to save it from going under after its founder had medical problems. That was okay. And the other film that I really, really loved, the one that already has a distributor, it's called Past Lives. So Past Lives is about these two Korean, a man and a woman who were childhood sweethearts. And then he stays in South Korea. She moves to New York, gets married to a Jewish guy. And then they reconnect through the web, through Skype, and they're talking. And he goes to visit her in New York. And there's still the spark between them. And the way I can describe Past Lives is like it's an Asian version of Before Sunset. It's very, very emotional. It's a movie that feels very lived in, and the emotional payoff is completely earned. So A24 went into Sundance with that movie already. A24 also went into the festival with a film called You Hurt My Feelings, written and directed by Nicole Holofcener. And I love Nicole Holofcener. She directed Enough Said. She directed Walking and Talking, Lovely and Amazing, Friends with Money, Please Give. Really observed comedies for grown-ups. But in this case, the actor who played Prince Philip in seasons 3 and 4 of The Crown, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who can do no wrong. So they're a middle-aged married couple, and she overhears something that he's talking about, the way it kind of, I don't want to spoil it, the way it kind of affects their relationship. But it feels very much a movie that everyone, absolutely everyone, especially over 30 years old, will absolutely relate to. That's also an A24 movie. And Nicole Holofcener, this felt like a vintage Nicole Holofcener film, and I just loved it. So those are the movies that I really, really liked.
That's great, Scott. Thank you.
Did you get a chance to see Radical while you were there?
Yes, I did. I did see Radical. It was the opening night film.
What did you think?
Okay, so Eugenio Derbez, who was the music instructor in Coda, so his performance is fantastic. And the movie is a teacher who inspires students to get better grades. I mean, come on. How many times has that story been done? You know, Goodbye, Mr. Chips, Stand and Deliver, Dead Poet Society, you name it. But it's all of those films, but it's done in a way that it's so gritty and so grounded. And the kids in the film, the students, especially these two students, a boy and a girl, it's more of an ensemble film that feels like you are seeing it for the first time. And it's a film that does earn its emotions. Looking at my notes, and it is literally the first film that I wrote down in my brand new notebook for Sundance that I got. And the first film that I saw was Radical. And my notes literally say, it doesn't fall prey to inspiring teacher tropes. It's not manipulative. It's a slow build, but it casts a spell and takes hold. It's inspiring. Eugenio is great. He makes the movie Goodbye, Mr. Chips. It gets better as it goes along. and it builds to a rousing finale. I'm literally reading from my notes.
Those are some radical notes, Scott.
That's actually great to hear because I'm actually friends with Ben O'Dell, who produced the movie, which is why I was asking. I'm curious. Eugenio is one of the all-time great guys. We've worked on so many of his movies. I know this is kind of, after Coda, this was a movie that he was really passionate about. And I was just curious to see how you felt it delivered. And it sounds like it delivered.
Yeah, it stood and delivered.
Oh, very good, Scott.
Especially the standing ovation that it got. I was really torn between seeing another film with Daisy Ridley that was opening at the same time, playing at the library, but Radical was playing at Eccles. And Eccles is the main theater where the biggest premieres that have happened over these last 20 years that I've been there for have played. And I felt like, this is the first Sundance in 3 years in person. And this is the very first screening at Eccles in 3 years. So I wanted to be there for it. I'm glad that I chose it because, the first 30 or 40 minutes, I felt like it was a little slow going. But during that time, you're building character. You're establishing relationships. So when things really start to move, you're invested into the characters, and the turns and the things that happen will have a bigger impact on you. So it was a smart move to actually go that route. And I will say this, that, there was definitely a thrill, an energy in the air for people who were there again, but there was also an apprehension because, gentlemen, look at how much this business has changed in 3 years. And where are these movies going to go? When I was at Sundance in 2020, I saw Promising Young Woman. Remember Palm Springs with Andy Samberg? Great film. The Father with Anthony Hopkins that won him the Oscar to the shock of everyone. But after that, maybe a month after,
everything shut down.
And Scott, I think you bring up a great point because things have been so disrupted over the past couple of years, almost 3 years, that now this feels like between our conversation about the Oscars and Sundance, as I now call it, or Mantz Dance, I don't know which, but that this really is a turning point because even though 2022 felt like a return to form, it was a very uneven year. Mike and I talked about this, about how there were 30 fewer films than is 40. Traditional, or 40. actually. And that, 40 fewer wide release films.
Actually, it's 41.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it was 112 in 2019, 71 last year.
Yeah, that opened in over 2,000 theaters. That's a potential. If each one of those made $50 million, that's $2 billion. So that's a lot. But this year is looking like we'll have 90, 95, maybe 100 wide releases. But I guess the point is that this feels like a return to some sort of normalcy that we as film fans have been missing. And like you talked about, Scott, the emotion that was in the room, both at the Academy nominations where you were there in person and also being at Sundance, really, I think for you especially, Scott, I mean, you're Mr. Movie Mantz, that it just has to be like a coming home, like a reunion of sorts with the industry. So that's really cool.
You talk about the fact that there were 41 fewer films. I mean, you can feel it because, last summer I felt like, wow, it feels like normal again. Like you had Top Gun and then you had Elvis. And instead of getting 2 blockbusters every weekend, you were getting at least one. But then after Bullet Train opened in August with Brad Pitt,
it got real quiet. It got
too quiet, and silence is deadly in this movie business because he didn't have another blockbuster until Black Adam came out. That movie was awful. And then Wakanda Forever opened, and that was okay. Definitely did well at the box office. But then it was slow again through Thanksgiving weekend until Avatar: The Way of Water opened. Look, after the shutdown from the pandemic, the studios are still getting back up to speed. And that's the reason why you had 41 fewer movies opening in theaters. But then when you look ahead to 2023, you've got first of all, Megan already did really, really well.
By the way, Scott, Megan, I think that should be nominated for Best Picture for 2020. I love that movie.
Megan is great. I mean, look, I wouldn't rule that out. Paul, it's produced by Jason Blumhouse, Blumhouse produced Get Out. That movie came out in February of 2017. You know, who knows? I mean, although I doubt it.
You know what? Well, yeah, but I'm rooting for it. But here's the thing. We've been going for over 40 minutes. It feels like 10 minutes to me.
I was going to say, Paul, we need to have Scott back because we didn't even get to talk about his career over at Access Hollywood, how that all worked out. We didn't get to talk anything about Star Trek, Scott. I'm very disappointed about that. But we'll save that for another time.
Well, Scott, we can count you as a friend of Ticket to Ride. And Scott, by the way, the biggest Beatles fan ever. So sort of an homage to you as well as the Beatles, calling our podcast Ticket to Ride.
I love it.
But we would love to have you back.
By the way, Scott, you are our first guest ever. I'll have you know.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
No way.
That we did. And we didn't even get to it all.
We went through the Rolodex and we thought, this is the guy. You're a friend of the show. You're officially our charter interview. We want to have you back, certainly on March 12 after the Oscars telecast. And what we'll do is, Mike, on that one, we'll interview Scott first about himself and his career. And Scott and I go way back. I mean, we can get into the box office showdown and all that stuff. But it's just been an honor to have you on. I think it was worth the wait because having the opportunity to speak to Scott Mantz about both the Oscar nominations and Sundance, where he was an on-the-ground correspondent, I think for Mike and I is an absolute honor and a pleasure.
The honor is mine.
It's been great having you, and thank you for making the time today.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Can't wait to come back. And anytime, fellas. And yes, you both got a ticket to ride. And I can't.
And you feel fine.
I like that. I like it.
And I feel fine.
Thanks, guys. And we'll see you soon. And thanks again, Scott Mantz, for being on Ticket to Ride. Thank you.
Anytime.